It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, fellow Quillers. Here we are for another wonderful episode of your favorite podcast, Don't Quill the Messenger. We're so glad that you could join us for today's episode. Today's episode is an exciting episode because it is going to provide a preview to you about an upcoming Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship event. It is an online virtual symposium that will be going on April 10. So if you're listening to this past April 10, you missed it. But if you're not, if you're listening to it right now before April 10, then you will have a chance to be able to tune in and join us for a wonderful Saturday afternoon filled with presentations and information about the Shakespeare authorship question. And to help promote the event is here with me in the studio, one of our favorite regular guests, Dr. Earl Showerman, who is serving as the coordinator of the event as well as one of the masters of ceremony. Welcome back to the program, Earl.
Wow, thank you so much, Stephen. Great to be here and glad to let the Quillers know about our April 10th symposium. And the good thing that I can add to what you just said is that these are going to be recorded and will be posted on the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website and YouTube channel in time in the weeks after the symposium is concluded on April 10th.
But we don't want them to wait to watch it on video. We want them to register for the event, join in, and participate live via Zoom, right? Isn't that how it's going to happen?
It's going to be a Zoom webinar, free. So to register, you simply go to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website, and on our homepage, there'll be a notification on our symposium on April 10th. Click there, and then you will see the program outline, and I'll talk a bit about that. And then there's a registration link. You just click on that, add your name and your email address, and that will be confirmed, and you will then be notified in the week ahead and in the day ahead of the program. On Saturday, April 10th, we will run on Pacific time from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., East Coast time from noon to 4 p.m. And of course, we will have guests from across the pond, from England. Kevin Gilvary and Julia Cleve are both part of our program. And so we hope to have listeners also and viewers from the UK participating in this program. And we also have Canadian scholar Michael Dudley on our program this year. So we're going international.
The guests from across the pond, it's going to be like 4 o'clock in the morning for them? Like what is that? I don't know what the time difference is from here to the UK.
It'll be in the evening for them.
It'll be early evening, late evening for them while they're tuning in or while they're presenting in live.
I think so. I don't think it's much of a problem. Actually, it's about 8 hours from the West Coast. So
So I've never been to England.
Well, Jim Warren, of course, will also be one of our participants. Now he's speaking from the Far East, and his presentation may come in the middle of the night. So we'll have to work it out with him and when best to include him in the program. But this is a program that kind of came together rather seamlessly through a variety of suggestions regarding papers that I received and other members of the program committee of the conference committee of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship have received in recent months. And the theme that we've kind of pulled together that seemed to relate to most of the talks that we were receiving information on contributed to the title of the symposium. We're calling it The Shakespeare Attribution, Information, Misinformation, and Changing Opinions.
Misinformation, that's a big part of it. And that's a big buzzword in today's modern times as well. And there is, an entire movement out there to try to eliminate and to, stay away from misinformation. And so I think it's a great aspect of the title to draw people in to realize that there is a lot of misinformation out there, and that's something that the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship is trying to correct and has been trying to correct over its more than 60-year history.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And that leads directly into commenting on Kevin Gilvary's presentation that we expect of him, which is basically on Shakespeare biography in the 21st century and the degree to which misinformation is being passed. He used the term biographiction to describe this.
I like that.
Yeah, this is the title of his PhD thesis, but he converted it to fictional biographies of Shakespeare in the book that was published just several years ago that relate to this. So Kevin has been a leader in the regard of confronting what has been written about Shakespeare biography going back several centuries, and really identifying how thin the sources are and how unsupported is most of the claims that are made by modern biographies, particularly Sam Schoenbaum and others who have been writing in the wake of his Shakespeare's lives that have been in the 20th century, publishing numerous volumes of Shakespearean biography that are based largely on fictional considerations and speculation.
It has always puzzled me throughout my time coming to the works of Shakespeare, learning about the traditional biography of the Stratford man, and then discovering Oxfordianism and becoming a member of this organization and moving forward with the aspects of the organization that I'm involved with. It has always struck me that these biographies of this guy don't have to adhere to what every other historical researcher or biographer must adhere to when they're writing a book about somebody's life. It blows my mind that they can get away with these conjectures and these posited theories without being able to point specifically to any proof, truth, fact, or written document. That I don't understand how this has been allowed to happen.
Well, at the same time that Shakespeare was gaining in prominence as a poet and playwright in the 17th and 18th centuries, there was no serious effort being made, according to Kevin's writings, that really investigated the facts of the man's life. And Bonner Cutting has also given very insightful presentations regarding how this evolved over time. Basically, was a conspiracy to suppress any doubt about the traditional attribution that was created through the first folio, the reference to Thy Stratford Monument and the Sweet Swan of Avon, the very thin references that we have to Shakespeare as a writer. From that are contemporaneous, of course. But Kevin is particularly insightful in his observations on this and noting how fictional narratives have become truthiness. There's a truthiness about this. That since Sam Schoenbaum cites this.
You gotta love that word, truthiness.
Yes.
How much truthiness is your Facebook post? So here's the thing. You post something on Facebook and they're gonna fact check you and misinformation you, and they're gonna put the little disclaimer down there. How come they're not doing that to these Shakespeare biographers?
Yes. Well, the more of the glaring obvious problems have to do with the implications regarding Shakespeare's personal relationship with the Earl of Southampton, to whom he dedicated Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece in 1593 and 94. Okay. But there's no evidence they had any personal connection. There's no evidence of payments that Southampton may have made to a man, Will Shakespeare, from Stratford upon Avon. And yet we know that the Earl of Oxford had connections to the Earl of Southampton. I mean, they were both wards under William Cecil's care during the latter part of the 16th century. So they clearly had some kind of connection. But as far as connecting Will directly to the Earl of Southampton, it's very, very questionable.
And same with the two dedicatees of the first folio as well. I mean, you can't connect Will Shakespeare of Stratford to the Earls of Pembroke and Montgomery in any way whatsoever, but you can immediately connect the Lord Earl of Oxford to those two men, most specifically by marriage for one of them, and on almost marriage to the other one.
Yes, absolutely. And the other character that's involved, of course, with the first folio production, and probably the person who was the primary editor and pulled all that together, is Ben Jonson. Okay. And of course, the nature of Shakespeare's relationship with Ben Jonson is problematic. And in fact, that is part of what Kevin will be talking about, because we don't have any documentary evidence that they ever met or had any kind of converse or whatever. We could speculate perhaps that they met at the Mermaid Tavern and talked about Greek sources within Shakespeare.
Oh, yes. The ever known Mermaid Tavern tavern of all knowledge, of
universal knowledge.
That's correct. The tavern of universal knowledge.
Yes.
There's a tavern here in Southern Oregon I go to. I like to think that it's the tavern of universal knowledge, but it's knowledge of a whole different thing. Let me tell you, brother. But before you get into describing the lineup, I do want to make sure to point out to listeners that as you mentioned earlier, it is free. It's absolutely free. It doesn't cost you anything to participate. The only reason that you have to register for the symposium is so that you can receive the links that you need in order to log into the Zoom presentations and participate and view them. And will there be Q&As as well?
There will be.
Yes. So that's the reason, ladies and gentlemen, for you to go to the website and register, is so that you can then be provided with the links that you'll need to get into the Zoom meeting and to be able to participate. And as Earl mentioned, yes, these will be recorded and they will be put up for later viewing. But if you want to be able to access the live Q&A portions of each presentation, you definitely want to register and participate on the day. So make sure you make a note of that, go to the website and get yourself registered so that you can participate that particular day. And as he mentioned, 9 a.m. Pacific time, Saturday, April 10, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Or if you're on the East Coast, that would be from noon to 4 p.m. Saturday, April 10.
And this corresponds very closely with the Earl of Oxford's 471st birthday. He was born on April 12th. So we're actually, programming this to help celebrate his
Happy birthday, Eddie.
Happy birthday, Eddie. And, part of it will also be some fundraising opportunities also for the Shakespeare.
They didn't really use Eddie back in Elizabethan times, did they? In fact, most Edwards were a Ned, weren't they?
They were Ned, but my lord.
Yes. So happy birthday, my lord.
Yes. Now, I'm going to be joined by Cheryl Egan Donovan as a co-host for the symposium.
Fantastic. Another one of our previous guests who's been on the program a couple of times. 2019
Oxfordian of the Year and the director, producer, writer of Nothing is Truer Than Truth, which has now gone international. Her wonderful video that is available on Amazon Prime and Hulu for those who have not seen Cheryl's film. I highly recommend it. It's an outstanding production. It really focuses on Shakespeare in Italy, but includes interviews with a whole variety of Shakespeare authorship personalities, and including Mark Rylance and Sir Derek Jacobi.
Wow, the big heavy hitters.
She definitely got herself in the right place at the right time and asked the best questions.
You can go to the Don't Quill the Messenger library of podcast episodes, and we do have an episode that welcomed Cheryl to the program where she discusses the film, how the film was made, what aspects of the film that she enjoyed the most and which were the most challenging. It's really great insight into what it takes to make a documentary film of that nature. So if you're interested in that, you can go find that episode if you haven't already listened to it.
Cheryl is also preparing a presentation on the circulation of manuscripts among the poets and the band of brothers that were so beautifully explicated in relationship with the Earl of Oxford during the De Vere Society symposium that they put on last December. So inspired by their discourse, Cheryl is creating a new discussion that I think will be very interesting to our listeners regarding how poetry was circulated in manuscript. It's referenced by Francis Mears in 1598. He refers to Shakespeare's sugared sonnets circulating among his friends, in addition to naming 12 plays, a number of which had not previously known to exist. So Mears was kind of spilling the beans on that. But I think Cheryl's presentation during the symposium will reflect directly on that. Philip Sidney, for instance, never wanted his plays his poetry to be published. It was all published posthumously. He preferred circulating in manuscript.
And so you'll be on the West Coast, and Cheryl, she's in Massachusetts. She'll be on the East Coast.
That's right.
Bi-coastal masters of ceremonies going on here, right? And I assume there'll be some sort of welcome that morning or afternoon, whichever coast you're on, when you begin to participate in the program. And then what's the lineup? Can you give us the actual lineup, and then we can talk a little more in detail about what each presenter is going to be focusing on.
Well, Cheryl will be in the studio at AV Presentations Communications, which are managing our production for this Zoom webinar. So we're very happy to have some professional assistance in doing this. And the De Vere Society's production of the Band and Brothers show last in December proved well that a professional support was very, very helpful in this regard, including rehearsals. Okay, so let's cover the cast of characters that will be presenting.
Yes, please.
Each of the presentations will be about half an hour. Besides Kevin, who we've already talked about from the UK, we will be hearing from Julia Cleave. Both Julia Cleave and Kevin Gilvary are trustees of the Shakespearean Authorship Trust. That is another organization that your listeners should be aware of that exists in England, and they have a whole archive of wonderful videos from previous presentations that were given. They usually give their presentations at one of the theaters associated with Shakespeare's Globe, with Mark Rylance and Derek Jacobi oftentimes appearing in their productions there. And I know Julia has been very involved with this. I met her back in 2012, and I visited England and gave a presentation on Shakespeare's medical knowledge at their annual conference. But Julia will be presenting a wonderful series of arguments regarding her revelations and how Shakespeare dared to present Queen Elizabeth on stage in the guise of Titania, Portia, and Olivia, and made sport with a colorful cast of the Queen's English, French, Spanish, German, and Swedish suitors. So be prepared, friends. Julia is going to break the case wide open that Shakespeare was writing very critically and very wonderfully and very humorously about Queen Elizabeth's suitors.
I absolutely agree with that, and I'm going to look forward to seeing that presentation because I'm right on board with that theory right there.
Yeah, Julia's has a MA from Oxford University. She's a fellow of the Temenos Academy and been a longtime trustee of the Shakespearean Authorship Trust. So she's very, very connected in this regard, and oftentimes is the producer in terms of their production of their presentations. So at the Shakespearean Authorship Trust, so I do recommend that Quillers go check out their website, look at their video files, the Italian and French connection ones that came back from 2014 and 2015. There's a whole series of outstanding videos.
Well, I can't wait to see who she says the suitors are represented in Merchant of Venice, the suitors of Portia in Merchant of Venice, because you've got Bassanio, of course, who ends up winning the prize, but then you've got the other three who are talked about by Nerissa, and in many cases by Nerissa and Portia, both in very derogatory terms. And I'll be curious to see who she says those men are representative of in real life. That'll be very fun.
No. I think you will very much enjoy her presentation, and it's new materials for people who are not familiar with what Julie has been writing on in the past. And I know that she's been in communication with historians of that era, including Susan Doran, who's a very respected historian of that era, who highly respects the kind of work that Julie's been doing and kind of breaking open the idea that Shakespeare could have been allegorizing members of the court while they were still alive. So,
for the longest time, I have believed that it needs to be one of the new focuses of this organization and the Oxfordian movement is to connect more strongly with historians and to look at this from a historical perspective as well as a literary perspective. But why continue bashing our heads against the English departments when we really should be making inroads is with the history departments? Because I think that the works of Shakespeare as a historical document is just as important as a literary or poetic or theatrical document.
Well, historians like Hugh Trevor Roper had serious doubts about the traditional attribution. So serious historians who are really looking at the documentary evidence and the lack thereof, I think, and David Ellis, another Shakespeare biographer, has written very well about the idea that most of what we read about Shakespeare biography is built on fictions that were promulgated, a century after Shakespeare's death. So we have a serious problem, Houston. Among the other presenters who relate to this kind of subject, and we're talking about historical documents and all this, is James Warren, Oxfordian of the Year of this past year, who will be presenting on his recent work on J. Thomas Looney's biography. He's working on a new book. Now, Jim has been incredibly prolific as a writer and an editor. The index of Oxfordian publications that he has made available to us as researchers is a phenomenal source. For those of you that want to know really about the volume of Oxfordian literature, you go to order Jim Warren's edited the index of Oxfordian publications. I refer to it all the time when I want to find an article that
he's a marvel, that man. The amount of work and time and energy and his contributions to Oxfordianism and to finally and hopefully and eventually getting to the full truth here, it really can't be understated. And it's amazing, as you mentioned, I know he's going to be presenting from Thailand, I take it.
I think that's where he's be at the time of the symposium.
Well, because he and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I had to call him at like 4:00 in the morning, in order to hit him at like 8 p.m. his time. So he's gonna, in order to be a participant in this, he's going to be also making another sacrifice and commitment to the organization and to this event, to set his alarm for like 2 a.m. or whatever to have to present at that time of the night.
Given the travels that Jim Warren has done in recent years to England and to the families and receive the incredible trove of letters and other documents that had been previously unrecognized that belonged to J. Thomas Looney, is just phenomenal. Of course, his Shakespeare Identified, the Centennial Edition, all Quillers should have read that. That is the foundational, almost biblical work that we have to work from. That is the beginning of this whole movement. And you should certainly be familiar with Looney's arguments that Jim does an excellent job of presenting in a modern edition that you can get on Amazon for very reasonable. And then his other book that, again, follows up on that, Shakespeare Revealed, which is in letters and in responses to the publication of, Looney's book, Shakespeare Identified. And then, of course, his most recent work and his forthcoming work on Looney's biography. Jim will also be participating in an authors panel that we're going to have toward the end of the symposium. We're going to have 3 of our foremost writers also be discussing the works that they're working on in the future. So
that's fantastic. And, just on a side note, I would encourage anybody who's listening, if you have these books, if you've read these books, and any of the books on Oxfordianism or that have been published by our members of SOF, if you would make sure that you go to the sites, whether it's Amazon, or another great one is to go to Goodreads. If you go to Goodreads, then you can rate and review the books, and that helps to bring them up in search engines and helps to push them to the top of searches so that other people who are interested in Shakespeare and in Shakespeare authorship can find those books easier and then also be able to get them in their hands. So if you would take some time, if you have a Goodreads account, if you have an Amazon account, take some time and just jot down a few lines of support for the book. It goes a long way. You'd be surprised.
All right. Well, since we were talking about Shakespeare biography and Oxfordian biography, I think one of the other talks that have been proposed comes from librarian Michael Dudley from Canada. Michael has published a chapter in a book on educational, standards, and he builds his argument on what he calls the framework for information literacy for higher education, and he looks at the criteria that were developed in 2015 and regarding the Shakespeare authorship question. And I'm just going to quote him here. He says, "This presentation critiques the divisive rhetoric that served to marginalize, ridicule, and defame scholars researching the Shakespeare authorship question. Such rhetoric and the academic taboo it reinforces is found to constitute a form of epistemic injustice, harming all Shakespeare scholars, whereas rhetoric informed by epistemic fallibility could invigorate the field."
And a topic of also a very recent episode of this podcast. We had Michael on as one of our guests, and we talked about that very chapter of his book. And so great compendium there. If you listened to that episode and you were intrigued, now you'll get to tune in to the symposium and hear him explain it more fully through this presentation, or vice versa. If you see the presentation and intrigues you as well, and you want to go then listen to our conversation, Michael and I had a great conversation about that very topic on one of our previous episodes.
He really knew how to cherry pick some of the most inflammatory commentaries from various scholars, and especially those affiliated with the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust in Stratford-upon-Avon, Sir Stanley Wells and Paul Edmondson, who put out their little diatribe against the whole question of the authorship attribution called Shakespeare Bites Back, which is available online. But if you read that, you see this as another libel against authorship doubters. It's truly a libelous. They recute conspiracy theories. They call this all conspiracy theory. They associate us with Holocaust denial or with alien abductions, and use all manner of means by which they suggest that if you actually doubt the traditional attribution, that you have some kind of mental derangement. Mark Rylance was accused of not thinking clearly for his doubts about this by Stanley Wells. They have expressed grave concerns over his ability to think clearly.
Next
about
thing
this
you know,
question.
they'll be calling us Neanderthals.
That's a loaded word today. Yes.
Couldn't resist.
Well, they certainly find us among the deplorables. No
Yes,
question
they do,
about that.
indeed.
So, but the proscription against Shakespeare authorship question is entirely without substance or validity, according to Michael. And I have to tell you, when I began my Shakespeare studies, this was 17 years ago, I started taking classes at the university here when I retired. And my first professor was the chairman of the department, a highly respected person who would work later as a dramaturg for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And I had the temerity not to say anything about my authorship affiliations, but some student brought it up, and he turned to him and rose up and looked down upon him and said, "You aren't one of those people who think Queen Elizabeth actually wrote the works of Shakespeare, are you?" And so it was very clear how close-minded he was over this whole question. And he didn't want, once he found out that I was an authorship doubter, he did not want me to take any further classes from him, So
You were banished?
I was banished from the professor's classes. I'm not going to name him, but I was sent instead to go to take classes from Elizabeth Eckhart. Liz Eckhart was the most popular instructor at Southern Oregon University at the time, and she's still teaching now there. Wonderful teacher. And when I, again, attempted to hide my identity as an Oxfordian, but then she would bring up questions in class about what about the poisoning of King Hamlet? Where does that come from? Well, there's a historical precedent from the 1530s. The Duke of Urbino was assassinated by his nephew, a guy named Gonzaga, so that you got the murder of Gonzago, and that's how Shakespeare learned about this, because he knew about this event that occurred in Italy in about 1538 or something.
See,
like
and
that.
that's exactly that's the type of thing I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And two things here. One, that I believe that is the key. So if you go to historians and you say, let's not even talk about authorship, let's just talk about historical context. Do you find historical context in this play? And if they go, yeah, absolutely. Then later on you go, okay, now how did the guy from Stratford know about this?
Yes.
That's the way into the door, I think, on one thing.
Oh.
The other thing, though, is currently right now, there has been some attack against Shakespeare by educators as being passé or too sexist or misogynist or racist, and it needs to be eliminated from instruction. And I would love to, every episode, I always think of another episode that could be done. And I would love to have an episode with this professor that you're talking about to discuss why teaching Shakespeare in today's high schools and colleges is still so relevant and important.
Oh, I have a couple of teachers that might be willing to have an interview with you for Quillers.
Excellent, because I think that's a very important topic right now as we're starting to see him sort of get erased from curriculum, and that frightens me.
Well, there's still a very, very loyal following of theater goers who will come back year after year after year to see him in live production. But you're right, in terms of literary studies at the universities, there's becoming it's de-emphasizing those classics, yes, and over social issues or racial or gender-related issues. Now, Shakespeare clearly created some incredible female characters who were put through hell,
yes,
and survive,
yes,
and triumph in the end. So
yes.
I don't think you could call Shakespeare an anti-feminist in some regard.
I would say the opposite. I'd say he's one of the earliest feminist writers.
He is, certainly.
Yeah.
And if it's the arrogant Earl of Oxford compensating for his misuse of his wife or his lover, whatever, I think it works for me too.
So who else is on the lineup?
Okay, so besides, so that concludes kind of with Michael, is our international representations. Roger Strittmatter, of course, the man who's editing the Brief Chronicles series for the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, is also going to give a presentation. And this is fresh material from Roger that I'm unfamiliar with. And he's saying that this is to present on a discovery regarding a popular novelist, Charlotte Armstrong, in her book, 7 Seats to the Moon. And he's talking about how the analysis she gives gives him a key to understanding the to the reader epigram across from the Droschet engraving of the first folio. So
the Ben Jonson
yes,
piece?
The Ben Jonson
I knew
piece.
that Roger was working on some stuff regarding
Yes.
Jonson and his connection to the folio, and I'm curious to see how that's playing out, what he's discovering.
Well, Jonson was remarkably elevated during that time. I mean, he was a poet laureate, and the praise of Jonson,
the first poet laureate,
poet laureate, and the praise of his works by his contemporaries was over the top. And Roger notes this, and yet in the 20th century,
that makes me scratch my head because I know a lot of Jonson's works, and he's no Shakespeare.
He is no Shakespeare. I have read Volpone. I did like the Volpone.
Volpone is one that I want to produce and direct someday. I want to do it with animal costuming, like so that the characters are actually just look like the animals that they are supposed to be.
Right. Well, anyway, so Roger's going to be working on an interpretation that relates to that particular a new way of interpreting the to the reader passage, which says, "Don't look on this image, look on his book." Basically, look at the content of the book. The image is misleading, and there are problems with the Droschet engraving. Most of us are somewhat familiar with. So that's his subject at this point, and it has to do with the elevated reputation that Jonson enjoyed during that time, and why was that the case, and perhaps the implications of a relationship between Jonson and Shakespeare that has been suggested or alluded to, but we have very little evidence to confirm the nature of their direct personal relationship. So Roger is always a very entertaining and fresh presenter, and of course his series of books on the Earl of Oxford's poetry he's working on now, and we'll be talking a little bit about that. He will also be part of our book panel. Now Roger has published, and you can still get a copy of his Shakespeare's Geneva Bible, which was his PhD thesis that was published almost 20 years ago now. And he and Lynn Koziski co-edited a book on The Tempest, on the sources, design, and other things of Shakespeare's The Tempest, which is an amazing piece of work that he did. And more recently, he has edited the Shakespeare Authorship Source Book, which is also available on Amazon online. That you can buy that book, which is a wonderful teaching tool for those people who are interested in this. And in the past year, he's engaged in a series of books, and the first has been published on the Earl of Oxford's poetry, He That Takes the Pain to Pen the Book.
Another episode of Don't Quill the Messenger that you can go and find is where we had Professor Stripmatter on discussing that book of poetry and some of the revelations that we discovered of the cover art, which was a fun moment in that particular episode of the podcast. So listeners can go back and listen to that as well. And Roger, being a educator at Coppin State University, I'm guessing that his Zoom capabilities are probably advanced compared to other presenters, because I'm guessing he's probably been doing a lot of Zoom classes for his students over the last year.
I'm sure it'll be an excellent presentation and fresh material for us. And then another East Coast presenter that you're familiar with, Stephen, because you've interviewed her several times, is Dorothea Dickerman.
Yes, of course.
And she'll be talking. This is a kind of a evolving presentation that she first gave at the Cosmos Clubs in Washington, D.C., a very fine club. And Tom Rainier has presented there, and other members. I think Jim Warren has also presented there. So we have connections of that august center in Washington, D.C. But she's going to present her thing, and the first thing we do is convince all the lawyers, and it's about her lawyerly discourse with her husband and the trip that they planned and took to Italy to prove to him that Shakespeare had to have been, in Italy during that time and traveled about to know the specificities regarding the literature of Italy, the geography of Italy, the connections and the culture of Italy for his works. So she has not presented to the larger group yet in the past, so I'm really looking forward to hearing her discourse on this. And I do think the Italian connection is an incredibly important part of the whole Shakespeare question.
Yeah, that was a fun episode of the podcast where she described the trip that she took to Italy with her husband and how she used the various sites in Italy to sort of open his mind to this concept that there's no way the author could have written these works without having visited those sites and having been to those locations. So that was a real fun way of her, as a lawyer, presenting evidence in a different format, in a different way, like with a hands-on, here you can see it for yourself type of tour through Italy. Wouldn't it be nice if we could take a bunch of people on a trip to Italy and demonstrate to them the same way that she did some of these details?
Oh, yes. Well, so the themes that we are, and of course I've mentioned that the fact that there'll be some further discourse by our publishers, Jim Warren, Roger Strittmatter, and Kevin Gilvary. Now, Kevin has not only written his fictional lives of Shakespeare based on his PhD thesis, but also is the editor of Dating Shakespeare's Plays, which is available free online on a website in the UK that the Vere Society has set up. And they are also reissuing it. The book was out of print, but they've reissued Dating Shakespeare's Plays now, so it can actually be bought on Amazon.
I have a copy of the original sitting right there on the bookshelf.
So they are reissuing it. It's now available. They are also working on 3 different books. Great Oxford, which was published a number of years ago, or maybe 15 years ago or so, this great a series of essays that were edited by Richard Mallam. And Kevin is editing Great Oxford 2, and Eddie Jolly, another great Oxford researcher in Great Britain, is editing Great Oxford 3. So we have 3 books coming out from the UK of De Vere Society affiliated scholars that will be a series of collections of essays that refer to the Shakespeare authorship question. So I think that our listeners have a much good reading ahead of them in the coming year.
Yes, and sometimes this is not to say that in we're sitting here right now, you can look at my particular library of Oxfordian publications, and not to say that I don't value each and every one of those books there, but sometimes, especially for those of you who may be just diving into this whole question, it is the collections of essays that can be more valuable at first than to try to dive into an entire full book by one author. One of my favorites, of course, I always say is Shakespeare by Another Name, but you maybe don't want to dive right into Shakespeare by Another Name until you've done a little bit of other reading. And that was true for me, in fact. And one of the pieces, one of my most valued publications over there is Tennessee Law Review.
Oh, yeah.
That had these great essays in it and I think that dates back to like the 1990s now.
It does.
That particular version of the Tennessee Law Review. But then there's always every year the Oxfordian.
Yes.
As well. And, collection of essays in there. Bonner's book is unique in the sense that it is a collection of her essays rather than, one full story. Bill Farina's book is also unique in that it's, takes it apart play by play. But I think these essay collections can be very enriching and very rewarding. And I will always point back to the Tennessee Law Review as being one of the most crucial publications that I read in my early Oxfordianism that drove me to all the other books.
Oh, yeah. And here's the other thing, Stephen, is that almost all those articles that were published in Brief Chronicles, in the Oxfordian, in the Shakespeare Oxford newsletter, in another older newsletter called Shakespeare Matters, and the Ever Reader that was edited by Gary Goldstein, these all are available, except for the very most recent issues, are available free on the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website. Just go to the homepage, click on Publications, click on Brief Chronicles or the Oxfordian, and each year you will see the display of articles that are available free to your listeners. I frequently research those articles, looking for particular interesting arguments that somebody's written about 15, 20 years ago that I can find easily between Jim Warren's Index of Oxfordian Publications and what's now available online and wasn't there 5 years ago, Stephen. So the ability for people to independently kind of research these questions is dramatically different today than it was just 5 years ago.
So the schedule on the 10th, it begins, who starts off? Who leads off?
Well, we still have to work out the schedule because of the fact that we're spread all over the world.
Oh, yeah. And when you mentioned the final panel of the 3 publishers, I mean, that's truly international. You'll have one on the West Coast.
Yes.
One on the East Coast. No, one on the East Coast of the United States. One in
Great Britain,
in the UK and one in Thailand.
Yes.
Holy mackerel.
We're hoping that the technology holds up.
That's a lot more complex than the symposium we conducted last October in Napa, where we were able to at least get most people together in the same room.
Let's talk a little bit about our future plans now.
Sure.
Also, because I do have some other things to say about the symposium, but it is with some regret that I can inform our Quiller audience here that the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship will not be holding an in-person conference this fall in Ashland. The Oregon Shakespeare Festival very recently, released their schedule of productions for this coming year, and they will not be putting on any stage productions of Shakespeare plays this calendar year. They are doing, during the month of March, a production of Julius Caesar, which was filmed in 2017, excuse me, but there's no other Shakespeare plays being in production this year. So with that, we canceled our reservation at the Ashland Hills Suites Hotel, and we have rescheduled our events in Ashland. Our next conference will be in Ashland. It's a wonderful place to go. We've met there 3 times in the past. There's always great productions during that time. It will be from September 22nd to the 25th, 2022. So with that in mind, we are going to be going more virtual between now and then, and the April Symposium is part of that campaign. And I do hope, Stephen, that come October, we will reenact something of what we did last year for the edification of our listeners and viewers, so that we can once again produce another live production with some recorded content from our best speakers from really all over the world. So I'm looking forward to that again in the fall.
Excellent. And so one thing too to point out is if you were a participant or you did register, or you did watch the symposium from last October that came live from Napa, remember that was a multiple day event. This event on April 10 is just April 10. It's the 4-hour block of time, regardless of what time zone you're in. So it's either 9 a.m. Pacific or noon Eastern. And it is just a 4-hour series that one day. So it's not a multiple day event or throughout the weekend.
And just to let everybody know also that these will be recorded as were the Napa recordings. And so they will be available. And the Napa presentations that we gave last October are all currently available on the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship YouTube channel. So
now those presentations went up pretty fast, and people were able to just go right to them. What will be the story with these presentations? Will there be a bit of a delay, or will they be immediately available on YouTube? I'm
hoping that we get them out within the first couple of weeks after the symposium.
But so there will be a bit of a delay at first. So all the more reason why you want to register for the event on the day and participate live on the day.
Now, one last thing I must bring up, because the months of March and April are the annual fundraiser for the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. And we will be talking a bit about that during the symposium. There are a number of gifts, actually, that are available to supporters of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship who contribute during the months of March and April. This campaign, including gifts, will end on April 30th. So your listeners have at least another month to think about making a substantial or a sizable contribution to our endeavors, which include, of course, this podcast, the publication of our journals, the maintenance of our website, and other educational programs we put forward. Among the prizes that will be awarded, and people can go to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website to see the details on these, were a lifetime membership in the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, which is a fresh idea that has just recently come up out of the membership committee. A marble composite bust of the Earl of Oxford designed by Paula Slater. And it's a miniature bust that we actually gave in a raffle one copy of this.
Okay, but wait a minute. The one we gave in October wasn't made out of marble.
It's composite marble.
Oh,
okay.
Okay.
It's like marble, but it's a composite that's mixed. Okay, so it's not carved directly out of marble, but
it's heavy.
It's
going to be expensive shipping that to somebody.
It's a beautiful piece, and of course, all of these gifts. Most of these gifts, I should say, are courtesy of Ben August, our host, who hosted us back in Napa, and who is the man who purchased the Herodotus, the Italian edition
Another
of Herodotus.
Great Don't Quill the Messenger podcast episode.
Yes, and so Ben is an incredibly generous trustee of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship and has offered a whole series of prizes, which includes that marble composite bust designed by Paula Slater, beautiful piece of work, an oil painting inspired by the Welbeck portrait of 1575. I've seen images of this portrait that is up for donors. It's gorgeous, and would be a beautiful piece of art for a true Oxfordian.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have to predict that that's going to be removed from the prize list because I'm going to call Ben as soon as we're done recording this episode and beg him to give it to me instead.
Well, Stephen, there are 3 copies of this that will be available, so you may secure one if you're in good terms.
I'm going to work on that. I'm telling you right now, Quillers, I am working on that. It's a magnificent piece. He has one that hangs over his dining room table at his home, and it's fabulous. Like the artist, it just goes to show you that a really good artist can replicate a painting, stroke for stroke.
Yeah,
and that's why our art forgeries exist in the world and have existed in the world for some time. Have you ever seen the movie F is for Fake? It's a great Orson Welles movie about art and art forgery.
Well, he also has put up lithographs, a beautiful lithograph that is like a Hamlet character that's holding up a light and the spotlight on the stage with the Virgo Nihil Virius emblem included in the image. And that's a lithograph also. Plus, as you know, he makes excellent wine. We have tasted his wine.
Yes, I do.
And this is comes under the Edward 17 label that Ben owns. And the combination of wines include a Cabernet, a Merlot, and a Sauvignon Blanc. So donors at a certain level will get a 3-bottle package of Ben's wines that are just wonderful. So if you want to celebrate in the proper way that a symposium is celebrated, which is with wine drinking, make a contribution to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship in a sizable amount so that you may receive this particular prize.
Can you just throw in quickly that little Greek origin reference there? My master of Greek friend.
Well, Plato's Symposium was a love feast. It was all about praising the goddess of love. And it was a wonderful gathering, and truly a number of famous characters within the Athenian polis at that time were guests of Agathon, who had won first prize for that year. So it's called Agathon's Feast. And Aristophanes was there, and Socrates was there, and Alcibiades was there. Characters that Shakespeare represents in his plays or references in some direct or indirect way within his tradition. So I do believe that the explication of love, the various ways that it is described by the Alcestis is mentioned by Phaedrus. He opens the discussion saying that she's the greatest exemplar of the sacrifice that love can you sacrifice your life so your husband may live, was part of that conversation. So the Symposium of Plato is very, very important. So we're using that term to help describe what we're doing here. And so wine drinking was definitely part of it. And in the end...
Will there be wine drinking on April 10? How are you going to handle that?
Well, depending on which coast you're on, you'll be more able to do that.
So throughout the program, as the MCs start to get a little more jolly over the 4 hours, you'll know that during the presentations, when the MCs are not on the screen, that they're off in the corner having a sip of wine.
Well, at the very end, and you'll appreciate this, Stephen, at the very end of it, Socrates, and it's been an all-night party. Everybody's either passed out or on the way. And at the final scene of the description of what was going on, Socrates is there. The dawn has come, and he's giving a final discourse to Agathon, the tragedian, to Aristophanes, the comic playwright. And he says, truly great playwrights should be able to write both comedy and tragedy. Do you think the Earl of Oxford took that message personally?
I think so. I would think, yes, absolutely. He probably added to that, and P.S., you have to be able to write good history plays too. And if you can write good history plays, you might end up with £1,000 a year annuity.
Paid handsomely.
Yes.
Well, we know that Henry IV, Henry Bolingbroke, hired or asked Caxton, it was Lydgate, to write his Troy book in praise of the great Trojan warriors that would then be exemplars for English noblemen and English warriors, because they claim direct descent from those Trojan lines. That Aeneas went to Rome and founded Rome, and then Brutus left Rome and from the same descendants and came to England. So you have a lineage here that is being projected, and the kings use their writers and the queens use their writers to promote the political philosophy and the respect for their authority historically. It goes way back.
Absolutely. So you got an all-star lineup there from an international cast. It sounds like it's going to be an excellent event filled with some literature, some research and information that we've touched on in the past, and some new stuff that's going to be brand new that hasn't been revealed before. I'm looking forward to checking it all out. And if you have not already, while listening to this, gone to the website to register, then when the program ends, make sure you do that. It's ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. You hear me say it every other week when you tune in to a new episode of the podcast. ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, your source and resource for everything Shakespeare authorship question, and particularly your source and resource for registering for the April 10 symposium. I want to thank you, Earl, for coming back to join us for another episode of the program. You hold the title as the most frequent guest.
I have a geographic advantage, friends. I only live about a 40-minute drive from Stephen's studio. So whenever I feel like I haven't been heard well enough, I call Stephen and slide over here.
Yeah, my wife, I think the last time you were on, Annie came to me and she said, I think Earl has dethroned me as the most common guest of the podcast. We need to schedule one. So I said, okay, what I'll tell you, we've had some requests from some of our listeners who would like to hear Annie and I discuss some of Shakespeare's film adaptations as actors and how we feel about those. And so that will be a future episode coming, ladies and gentlemen. I promise it's in the works as we record this episode today. So thank you again, Earl, and thank you, Quillers, for inviting us into your living room, your exercise room, your gardening, your shower, your jogging, your car, wherever it is that you listen to us. We're grateful to have you as loyal listeners. We thank you for adding us to your retinue of podcasts and entertainment, and we hope that week after week we share with you informative and intriguing, as well as hopefully sometimes even entertaining content. Please be sure to join the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. You can do that from the website as well. Register for the symposium, and know that your contributions to the organization do help support this program as well as the other outreach efforts of the organization. And we're so grateful for our loyal listeners who have supported the program. Remember, there is an entire library of more than 50 episodes. So if you haven't heard them all, go back in and choose and pick and find the ones that most interest you. If you've got a favorite, you want to listen to it again, you can do that as well. They're all there available all the time. And you might even want to suggest to a friend or a relative to tune into the podcast, or find an episode that you think might be interesting or intriguing to them as a sort of intro, a white Zinfandel, as it were, the intro gateway wine to this whole issue. And we hope that if you do that, you also will go to wherever you get your podcasts and give us a rate and a review, give us a 5-star, and give us a few comments. If you have an idea for a future episode, if you have something you'd like to share about previous episodes, you can always reach us at contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. And remember, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
Dragon Wagon.